Great. All right. So guys, I want to talk about I think a very crazy idea. I think you'll appreciate it. It's about Purim. We didn't talk about Purim yet, right?
We
We haven't.
touched on it. We had a touch on it. That's it.
What with me or with someone else?
We had a touch on it, I believe, with you,
What did I say?
and then we continued with Rabbi Zitron.
What did I say about Purim?
You were just leading on it. You were leading about. Damn, I forgot at this point. It was like a pre-story. It was like a small sneak peek.
It was about Amalek.
Yeah, like the definitions. Oh, here you go. Yeah, you reminded me.
What did I say about Amalek?
You were saying how funny it is that we Jewish people named the holiday after something that wanted to kill us.
Oh, okay,
Right?
fine. I discussed this. Fine, good.
Hey,
All right.
hey, memory is still intact.
Very nice. Okay, so let's talk about something else. Um, one of the things that I think is very important to talk about in general is misconceptions. One of the, Ronald Reagan used to say about his political opponents, he said, it's not so much what they don't know that's a problem, the ignorance, but it's the things that they know that just aren't so, right? In other words, misconception. Now, Judaism, one of Judaism's biggest problems, one of the biggest problems that we have is that we think we know certain things about Judaism and we simply do not. And those mistakes lead a lot of people either to avoid coming closer to Judaism. I mean, it certainly stopped me early on. If you would have asked me at certain points as a very young man, my thoughts about Judaism, I would have said a whole bunch of things that were simply inaccurate, right? So ignorance is bad enough. And yes, I was very ignorant, but piling on top of ignorance, making it just infinitely worse, was just a whole slew of misconceptions. So I want to deal with some of the major misconceptions about Judaism to help us to really have a solid grasp of what's actually real. Now, why am I doing this? Well, I think it's important that we have these answers because people are going to be asking us these questions, right? The rabbis say, "Da ma lahashiv la'apikoret." You have to know what to answer to the heretic. Okay, and then the rabbis immediately comment, and which heretic do we need to know how to answer? The one who's in our own heart, right? The Yetzer Hara, right? We all have a little heretic who's hanging out inside of us. I've actually seen mine on an MRI. I know exactly what it looks like. We all have a little heretic, right? That's trying to cause us a lot of problems Jewishly. Yeah. Now, some of for the most part, it's again two major things: ignorance, but even worse than ignorance is misconception. See, ignorance is easy to fix. Oh, I didn't know. Ah, now I know, right? Like it's really that simple. Conception, because they're things that we think are true, it's always much harder to uproot something that we think is true and then get to what's really going on behind there. Right? We see this a lot in many areas of life, but we're going to focus on it from a Jewish perspective. So, we're all going to be on the bus, train, plane, at a Russian party. Russian parties where you sit around the tables covered in food, sitting, talking, and eating, and then somebody gets up and sings an American song in a bad Russian accent. Russian parties. We've all been there a million times with Olivier and Krasny Kras and all that great stuff. No, 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 delicious. So, in all of these places, people are gonna, look at you, especially if you're a man with a yarmulke on your head, or you look a little Jewish. Maybe if you're dressing in modest skirts or something, and then somebody's gonna say, oh, blah 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 blah, and they're gonna start to ask you questions. You want to know what to answer. But you also want to know what to answer yourself. Now, the more answers you get, the stronger you're going to feel, because one good answer, it feels good. Two, three, four. By the time you get to a certain number of things that were misconceptions that you have good answers for, it gives you a real sense of confidence that there's answers to everything. Right? I just haven't seen them all yet. So even when you're only there's a certain tipping point, and each person may be a little bit different, right? But once you've seen a few percent of the answers that are out there, not even really that many, but it really gives a sense that people have thought very deeply and very intelligently about all of these questions that I have and other people have, and there's a lot of really good answers out there. All right. So with that preface, let's start getting into some of the major misconceptions. So one of the biggest things that people complain about Judaism is that, Rabbi, I don't trust that the Judaism that you have today is authentic. And I'll tell you why. Because the rabbis argue about everything. So if the rabbis argue about everything, then how do you know what's really true? Every rabbi's got another opinion. Two rabbis have three opinions. You know, that famous joke. I was once speaking in front of a group of ragers many years ago, and I said, you know, the famous expression, two Jews, three opinions. And somebody yelled out at me, no, Rabbi, it's three Jews, four opinions. And I'm just like, wow, thank you for publicly proving my point. We can't even agree on the joke. Hysterical. So, rabbis are, you know, you look in the Talmud, like that's really where you want to look, right? We look in the Talmud, in the Gemara, and pretty much every page has at least one debate on something in Judaism. Probably, maybe many pages have more than one. Whether the law is like this or like that, whether the Jewish philosophy is like this or like that, whether this is what happened at that time or something else happened. The rabbis argue about everything. So people are constantly arguing back and forth about the very nature of Judaism and our worldview. And this, many people would look at that and say, you guys don't even know what your own religion is. Because, like, how do you know? Oh, you do this, but another rabbi says different. So that's one of the major challenges that people, how many times have I heard this over the years? A few, not crazy a lot. I read it in a few places as well. But a lot of people have this in the back of their head. So what I want to claim is that really this is just a misconception. This is a mistaken understanding that Judaism, the rabbis argue about everything. Okay? And now I'll bring you evidence, and we have to think, gotta put on our thinking caps, whether this or whatever else. I'll try to understand.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yes.
Hold on, let me put on my video. Does that include like academic criticism, like Bible criticism? Is it fit in the same?
No, we don't regard them as legitimate criticism. So they're not even in the discussion.
The thing is, like lately I've been seeing a lot of activity of these like academic, these Bible critics, these academics. Like for example, like on Facebook, on my newsfeed, I saw this thing pop up. It's called The Torah. It's the Torah.com. And supposedly it's founded by frum Jews. When you go to the About page, you look them up, they're wearing kippahs. But every post is nothing but like for example, like there's posts like, for example, can orthodoxy survive biblical criticism is one that I'm looking at right now. And have like all of these like supposed like refutations.
Mark, I just gotta laugh about that for a second, because orthodoxy survived the Khmelnytsky massacres, they survived Hitler, they survived Stalin, they survived, American assimilation, they survived a few hundred Orthodox Jews learning Torah left in the entire planet Earth right after the Holocaust, and we're not going to survive biblical criticism? Like, come on.
Right.
Seriously.
No, I mean it's preposterous, right? It angers me, and people like, but at the same time, like the logician, the intellect in me wants to take on the challenge in order to strengthen the faith. You know what I'm saying?
That's great. That's what we're doing right now. So we'll have to, of course, we have to only go one question at a time. But
sure.
Let's put that on the list. Biblical
Okay.
critical theory is officially on our list.
Awesome.
Right?
Thanks.
I'll give you one, just a tasty morsel for you to chew on a little bit. Right? Because one of the central points of the early biblical critics back in the 19th century, in the 1800s, is they said, what do they call the different parts of the Torah? They call it the E documents and the J documents, like that. Why do they name it by these letters? Because their claim is that the different names of God in the Torah, Elohim, Hashem, etc., right, are reflections of different peoples who had different gods, and they were all different tribes. They all came together, and their books were all brought together. And someone called the redactor brought all their texts together and edited them and created what we call today the Torah. Now, if you take any young boy or girl that grew up in yeshiva, and you go to them and you say, why are there different names of Hashem in the Torah? Right? Not a single one of them is going to go, there's different names in the Torah? Oh my goodness. Like it's absurd. It's such a stupid criticism because it's been a long part of our tradition for thousands of years, exactly why there are different names of God in the Torah. And I'll give you the easiest way to understand it, right? What do you guys generally call me?
Rabbi.
At least in public.
Rabbi G.
Call
Rob.
me Rabbi G, Rabbi, right? Right? You know, what do my kids call me?
Poppy.
Daddy. Daddy. I wanted Papa because I call my father Papa, but my wife vetoed it. She's like, no, Papa. Right? They'll call you Daddy. Right? So my kids call me Daddy. My mom calls me Sonchik. My wife calls me something I'm not telling you because it's private between me and her. Right? But everyone's got different names for me. Does that mean that there's like 5 different me's and somehow they all got smushed together into some? It's stupid. Each name is a different relationship. I'm one me, but I have a different relationship with you that I have with my kids, that I have with my wife, that I have with my mother, that I have with my rabbis. So each name, like this is such an ancient tradition in Judaism that every time the name of Hashem in the Torah changes, it reflects a different relationship that he's having with the creation at that moment. Such a simple, easy response. And yet these academics come up with oh my goodness, and wrote hundreds of papers on it and thousands of pages. It reminds me, one of my rabbis said, you know, what is an expert? What's an academic? An academic, an expert in academia is someone who knows more and more about less and less until you become such an expert that you know absolutely everything about absolutely nothing. That's the ultimate PhD. All right.
And Rabbi, one quick thing. Also, it's like I know, for example, like when I was studying Humash, right, and Rashi, I was looking at Rashi. There's some verses in Rashi, at face value, like you can't really understand what's going on because there's what's known as agada, depth, right? And I feel like this is my personal way to refute academics is like they don't look at the depth between the lines. They don't look at the agadic interpretation of
You don't
things.
even need to do that. You don't even need to, because there are plenty of rabbinic commentators in the Torah that don't even go to Agada or Midrash, right? They keep it very, very simple, just along with the Jewish tradition about how to understand these verses in their simplest, what is called a pshat. Right? Pshat is the simple one.
Pshat, right.
Right? And there's answers for all these questions. Okay, I just wanted to give you that as a little bissel, as they say in Yiddish, a little bissel. All right, so back to the rabbis argue about everything misconception. Okay, so if I had to estimate, right? Well, let me ask you guys: if you had to estimate in the Talmud, there are 2,200 pages, right? How many arguments are recorded between the rabbis in the Talmud? If you had to estimate,
6,000.
yeah, it's probably not unreasonable. I would probably have said higher. I probably would have said 10. If somebody told me 20,000, I wouldn't even be shocked. I would say, wow, that's pretty dense in some places. But it's clearly not higher than that. Like 20,000 as a high estimate, maybe 6,000 as a lower estimate. But either way, like let's 20 to 6, what's that? 26,000, 13,000 average. Let's cut it nice and even, 13,000 or so. Let's estimate somewhere around 13,000 debates and arguments within the Talmud, on Jewish law, and Jewish worldview, etc., etc. Okay. So now we have one piece of information: how many things the rabbis argue about. But if you are an intelligent thinker and you want to know how to measure how bad that is, what other information would you need to know to be able to have a rational and intelligent measurement of how troublesome 13,000 arguments is?
Rabbi, can you just kind of like repeat the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know one piece of information, right? 13,000 arguments in the Talmud's 2,200 pages. Okay. But but is that enough information to make a judgment? Because here it is. I tell you something. There are 13,000 arguments in Torah. That's a statement. As one of my rabbis said, it's parv, right? It's not meat, it's not milk. It's just a valueless statement of pure information. Now, your human mind makes a judgment. Oh, that's terrible. So many arguments, right? But where did you get that judgment from? Do you not need more information to make that judgment? What other information would you need to put the 13,000 arguments into proper context before you could make a judgment of how bad it is that there are 13,000 arguments?
Well, you would need to know the prepositions preceding the arguments.
What do you mean?
Know, meaning like on what bases are people arguing about? Like,
Good.
what are they arguing?
So that's one thing. One thing is, what are they arguing about? Because if all 13,000 arguments were rabbis sitting there going, I like vanilla, I like chocolates, it's not much of a challenge to Judaism, right? Those are meaningless arguments. So good. What are they arguing about? That's one thing you need to know. Excellent. Now, someone else give me one more super important piece of information to know. So what Mark just mentioned is what I would call the quality arguments. What is the quality of the arguments, right? But there's something else you need to know. If it's not quality, it's what?
Quantity.
Quantity. So now that you know I'm thinking in quantity, now ask an intelligent question.
How many of the arguments go unresolved?
That's not bad. That wasn't where I was going. I would put that probably more about the quality, because it's like, how bad are the arguments? But I hear that question. I like it. But I need something more about context.
Like, why are there that many arguments? About what?
About what? That's also still more about the quality. Let me give you an example. Oh, not an example. Let me give you a parallel, like analogy. If somebody says to you, "Oh, Rabbi Goldstein and his wife, right? They've argued 100 times."
Over what period of time?
Good, right? Isn't that important to know? If they argued 100 times today, is very different than they argued 100 times over 18 and a half years of marriage, right? You're putting in context of how long. So within the Talmud, we're not going to do time, we're going to do something else, but the same idea. They argue 13,000 times. Out of how many discussions total? In other words, how many times did they not argue? How many times did they agree? So if the rabbis in the Talmud have 15,000 serious discussions, and of those 15,000 serious discussions, they have 13,000 serious arguments. And I haven't even said if they're serious or not yet. We're just making that assumption. That would seem to be extremely problematic. But what if they had not 15,000? What if they had 150,000 statements, right? And out of 150,000 statements, 13,000 are serious arguments. Well, that's a little less than 10%. That's a very, very big difference. Okay, that's number one. Number two, and I'm just going to tell you straight up, the rabbis agree on almost everything. The number of places they argue is large only if you don't compare it to how many places they don't argue, right? Let me give you an illustrated example that will explain both the quality and quantity argument. Okay, guys, according to Jewish law, are men and women allowed to be intimate before marriage?
No.
It
No.
depends on which synagogue you go to.
I said Jewish law.
I'm just kidding. No.
It depends on how much you pay the rabbi. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's a joke.
Of course, it's okay. I got you. Right? So, right, imagine a room full of rabbis that get together and they say, we're going to write down the Talmud. Okay, guys, we ready? We're going to write the Talmud. And one rabbi gets up and says, let's talk about men and women and being intimate. And the rabbi says, I learned from my rabbis, the Torah says that it is not permitted until they're married. And the whole room full of rabbis goes, yeah, of course, obviously, yeah, that's what I learned from my rabbi too. Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. No, looked around the room, no argument. Good. Another rabbi gets up and says, I learned from my rabbi that before they get married, they have to do a process called kiddushin. Kiddushin is where they become separated from all the other men and women in the world to be special to each other. They're not married yet, but they're already separate. But nowadays we do it all on the same day. If you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, they do kiddushin and then immediately followed by the wedding, the actual marriage. They both happen in the same place. But back in the old days, they would sometimes do kiddushin, and then the guy would go home and work for a year to raise money to support a family, and then they would get back a year later and get married. Right? But already for that whole year, they're set aside for each other. They're not allowed to be with anybody else. Okay? It's kind of like
Don't like Hasidim have something like that.
no.
No?
All Orthodox Jews only do
Uh-huh.
kiddushin right immediately followed by what's called the nisuin, which is the actual marriage. That's why when I do Jewish weddings, I always do the kiddushin and then I say Mazel Tov, you're engaged, according to Judaism, and everyone gets a laugh out of it, right? Because they might have been engaged for months or years by that point. And then I say, okay, now let's do the marriage. It's good, because no time to waste here, and long engagements are not healthy. A lot of good jokes that I do at weddings. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. So.
I'm so
Everyone,
sorry, Rabbi. Can I just make one small announcement?
of course.
Whoever is Yah's iPhone, please let me know who you are. Thank you very much. Also, if you did not put in your name, I'm not counting you. So write it in. Thank you.
Also, you guys, please have your videos on. That is the rules of the program. You must have your video on. Oh my gosh. Look at her. She's so cute. How old is she now? Riva, how old is she? 4, 5. You're not sure? It's fine.
Today's her birthday. She's 5.
Mazel tov. So adorable. Okay.
Thank you.
See this little curly Juhuro hair. I love it. Okay. Where was I? Oh yeah. So the rabbis get up and they say, yeah, it makes sense. Kiddushin. Of course. Everyone agrees. You do Kiddushin first. Good. Third rabbi gets up and says, to do Kiddushin, the man needs to give an object of objective financial value to the woman as part of the process of mikadesh, of making her Kiddushin. That's where the wedding ring comes from, right? And all the rabbis in the room go, yeah, of course. You have to do a Kiddushin B'Kesef, it's called. Of course. You have to use value to do Kiddushin, and it doesn't work without it. Okay, good. And then another rabbi gets up and says, and I learned from my rabbi that Kiddushin value, it can't be arbitrarily small. There's a minimum value that can't go lower than that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And everyone in the room says, yes, of course, 100%. Yeah, we're all there. We got it. And then another rabbi gets up. Don't worry, we're almost done. I know the story seems long, but there's a point to the story, so stay with me. Another rabbi gets up and he says, I learned from my rabbi that the minimum value of kesef kiddushin, the monetary value given by the man to the woman for kiddushin, is 1 penny. And then another rabbi gets up and says, a penny? Что с тобой? Right? Did you pay attention to your rabbi? You must have been asleep that day. It's $1. And another rabbi gets up and says, $1? Well, you dropped on your head as a kid? You must be brain damaged. It's a quarter. Another rabbi gets up and says, a quarter? Are you even Jewish? It's obviously a nickel. And they fight and they yell and they scream and beards are pulled and chairs are thrown and fur hats are stomped on. Right? It's a huge thing. And finally, the rabbis, they can't agree. Is it a penny, a nickel, a dime, $1, a quarter? Nobody knows. We don't remember. We argue. I mean, everyone remembers, but they don't remember different. So then they get together and they make a vote. The Jewish court gets together and votes. And then that's the law that's written in the Talmud. And for all time, the law follows the majority votes of the great rabbis of the Sanhedrin of the Supreme Court of the Jewish people of that time. Now, what does this story illustrate for you? It illustrates both the quantity issue and the quality issue. Let's look at quantity first. In this small example, they agreed on everything until the very end, where they disagreed on one point, and they spent a long time back and forth, and they bring proofs and they bring arguments, and because the rabbis want the truth so badly, they fight for every word of it, even on something minor, because there's nothing minor in the word of God. Right? However, when you look at the quality of what they're arguing about, The majorest principle, the most umbrella large principle, you must get married. Everyone agrees. A smaller but still vast principle, Kiddushin. Everyone agrees. Kiddushin Bekesef. Everyone agrees. Minimal value. Everyone agrees. And finally, in like it's a Matryoshka doll. You guys know Matryoshka doll, the Russian dolls? It's a big doll, and you open up another doll, and you open up another doll, until finally you get to the smallest doll, the littlest point to argue on. And now at this point, we don't have a clear tradition about exactly how much it is. And now they fight to finally get clarity. Guys, I'm not trying to claim that every argument in the Talmud is like this, but most of them are. Most of the arguments are, number one, they're a minority compared to how much the rabbis agree upon. And number two, they're not in major principles. They're in details or subcategories within the principles, sometimes multiple layers down, many matryoshka dolls down to the center. If you put together it all in context, how many arguments, what type of arguments, I think it is fair to say, it is logical and reasonable and rational to claim that in the grand scheme of things, the amount of arguments that the rabbis have about Judaism is zero. The rabbis do not argue about Judaism. Right? If you put it in the context, round to the nearest percent, it's 0%. Now, obviously, I'm not being literally true. The rabbis argue. There are many arguments. And by the way, the rabbis are very upset about the fact that there are arguments. They want to know every single thing that God said on Mount Sinai. The fact that anything at all was lost over time is a tragedy. The very first time the rabbis had an argument and they didn't know what the clear tradition was, they said a national fast day. The whole Jewish people fasted and cried because one law was not clear anymore. That was obviously hundreds of years before the Talmud was written. And many more arguments crept in, but put it in context.
Which law was that? Can I ask?
It's interesting. When you do an animal sacrifice in the temple, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to physically lean on the animal, right? You feel its body heat. You're like, this animal, I should be the one dying for my sins, but this animal will go instead of me, right? But you want to be close to it. You don't want to be distant. You want to feel its heat. You want to see it bleeding and dying because you want to have a powerful emotional experience with this whole thing. So on Shabbat, it's forbidden to do the leaning. If an animal is sacrificed on Shabbat, you don't lean on the animal. But what about on Hagim, on Yom Tovim, the holidays? Do you lean on the animal like a weekday, or do you not lean on the animal like Shabbat? That was the very first argument the rabbis ever had. One rabbi said you lean on an animal on Yom Tov like a weekday, and one rabbi says you don't lean on the animal on Yom Tov just like it's Shabbat. And when the rabbis saw that there was no clear tradition and they had to vote, we fasted as a nation and we cried, Hashem, please save us from our sins that we forgot a piece of Torah. So I'm not saying it's a small thing, but let's put it in context. The claim that the rabbis argue about everything and therefore you can't be clear about the nature of Judaism is simply a misunderstanding and a misconception. It's not true when you actually pay attention to the context and to the details. Okay, guys, let's take a 5-minute break. At 8:50, we will continue with our second class. If anybody wants to hang out for 5 minutes and ask me any questions, you're welcome to do so.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that there was a question about sacrifice, in Shabbat. For some reason, I thought that was the whole purpose of the Shabbat, right? To kind of rest on Shabbat, so they don't do like 39, jobs in the temple.
Yeah.
Right. So like.
Not exactly. You see, whenever you have a positive mitzvah, it always pushes off a negative mitzvah. So there's a positive mitzvah in the Torah to bring a sacrifice in the temple every day. It's called tamid. And since Shabbat is included in every day, the positive mitzvah of bringing an offering on Shabbat pushes off the negative mitzvah of not, causing a wound to an animal on Shabbat. I'll give you a practical example that still happens today. if you have a baby boy and on the 8th day, the mitzvah day to do Brit Milah, and it falls out on Shabbat, then you do the Brit on Shabbat, right? Even though it's cutting and blood and everything else, the positive mitzvah to do the Brit pushes aside the negative mitzvah not to cause a wound. But that's only true if it's the 8th day. If a boy is a little bit sick and they push it off after the 8th day, and let's say the doctor says you can do the Brit tomorrow, no problem, and tomorrow is Shabbat. If it's not the 8th day, you do not do the Brit on Shabbat. You wait to do the Brit until the next day.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. But the whole, so my perception of Shabbat was that it's made for resting, right? So if you do sacrifices on Shabbat, is that opposite of the resting? Like,
I think I understand your question better. The whole point of resting on Shabbat is to show that Hashem is in charge. I'm not in charge. I don't do creative ownership activities. That's what malacha, or forbidden labor, is. But that's why turning on a light takes very little energy on my part, but it's forbidden on Shabbat. But moving my table across the kitchen floor might take 100 times more energy, but it's not breaking Shabbat, because one of them falls under the principle of creativity and ownership activity, and the other one does not. But in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, bringing a sacrifice, that's not showing you're in charge. That's God's in charge. He's commanding us to do this. So it's not contradictory to Shabbat.
okay, so even though that was their job, they still basically worked on Shabbat, right? So like Levim or Kohanim, whoever, right? So
It's not forbidden from the Torah to work on Shabbat.
oh really? Oh okay.
What's forbidden from the Torah is many specific activities. That's why using money and electricity and all that is a problem. That's why, by the way, I'll give you an example. Modern days, you ever go to a simcha or something, or a Shabbaton, and there's Jews that are acting as waiters, right? And then they're going to get paid during the week for their work. Why are they allowed to do that? Because you're allowed to work on Shabbat. They just have to arrange it in such a way that they're not getting paid just for the Shabbat. Like they're getting paid as a weekly salary, right? They're not getting paid for the work on Shabbat specifically. So there's rabbinical workarounds, but they're allowed to be the waiters in Shabbat as long as they don't break any of the forbidden labors.
Yeah, but they don't do as far as I know, like they don't do like, I'm not sure, like when you cut something, right? So you can't actually, that's why we don't and I don't know if that's true or not, but you can't brush your teeth on Shabbat because your blood can come out. So we can't deal with blood, right? So the same thing. I was curious, like if you cut the animal, so that means you.
Yeah, but because I think about it, just look at it in context. Brushing your teeth, you're not doing a mitzvah. So wait until tonight after Shabbat is over, right? Saturday night. But cutting the animal to offer it on the temple is a mitzvah from the Torah, right? One of them is not a mitzvah. So why would you can't break the bleeding law, not to cause bleeding? One of them is a mitzvah.
Right, to give tzedakah is also a mitzvah, right? So I see the point.
Yeah, but you can give tzedakah later. You give tzedakah after Shabbat is over. There's no mitzvah to give tzedakah now, right? But there is a mitzvah to bring the offering every day, which includes Shabbat.
Yeah, I agree. But like, what if that person, I want to give to that person, and that person really in need, right?
They're gonna die if you don't give them $1 right now. Come on, give them after.
He's gonna walk out or something, you know.
But that's his free choice. If a person says, if you don't give me $1 now, actually, I'll give you a really interesting scenario, right? To like really maximize your question. If you happen to be walking in the street and the guy says, I need $1 right now, or I'm going to kill myself, there's probably plenty of room for you to go and get $1 on Shabbat and give it to him to save his life. Because you're not giving, but at that point, you're not doing the mitzvah of tzedakah. At that point, you're doing the mitzvah of saving a life.
Right.
So you have to distinguish.
But my actual question was, it's the also positive mitzvah, right?
But it's not every day. It's not a mitzvah to do every day.
I thought you can break the law, you can break Shabbat only if the mitzvah is significant, right? So if the mitzvah is significant, even positive, right? So then you can break. So like Brit Milah was given much before the Shabbat was given.
No, that's nothing to do with it. It's if it's a positive mitzvah from the Torah that you can't push off until after Shabbat, then you do it on Shabbat.
Okay.
Hey,
Right?
Rabbi,
Tzedakah, you can push off until after Shabbat. Yeah, one last question, and then we got to get back to this session. What's up?
1 second, just 16. Jesus.
Got a lot of echoes.
Yeah, my bad. Question is, you were talking about Purim at the beginning of the lecture, and it got me thinking of the name Mordechai. I mean, coincidentally, I was looking up the meaning of the name Mordechai.
Oh, you dared to research, silly Jew.
Well, no, it wasn't. It's so funny because I wasn't doing it now. I was doing it last night. For
Mm.
some reason, the meaning of the name Mordechai in particular interested me. And when I was looking it up, I mean, there's some contradictory stuff on the internet, as I'm sure everybody would expect. Like on one website, they said that Mordechai is translated to worshiper of Marduk, and Marduk. Marduk was a Babylonian deity, supposedly.
Not only was he a Babylonian deity, he's the main Babylonian deity. He's like their Zeus.
Okay, so that's
Yeah,
true.
so how about more? How about Esther comes from Ishtar, who was Marduk's wife, or something like that, female goddess. How about the fact that all of the Jewish months are actually Babylonian by name?
Interesting.
That there is no name for the months in the Torah. They're called month 1, month 2, month 3. But then after our exile in Babylon, all of the months now have Babylonian names. And I'll go even further. How about what do you call the first day of the week?
Monday?
Well, Sunday technically, yeah.
Oh, okay, Sunday.
So here's the problem. In the Torah, there is no names for the days of the week. The names for the days of the week in the Torah is day 1 to Shabbat, day 2 to Shabbat, day 3 to Shabbat. That's what all the days are called, and then Shabbat finally at the end. But now we call all the days of the week are all pagan. The sun day, the moon day, right? And then Tuesday, Tu was a Norwegian god, a Norse god, Tu.
On
Wednesday
Juhuro
is
language, the same
Odin,
thing.
Odin. Thursday is Thor's day. Friday is Frigga's day. Saturday is probably from Saturn, the Roman god, right? All of the days. So it's funny to me that we have no problem using Hebrew months that are named after Babylonian months, and we use days of the week that are named after Norse and Roman gods. It doesn't bother us. It's an interesting question.
But let me ask you this, if I may. Since Mordechai is considered a Jewish name,
Yes.
and the origin of the Jewish name, the substance of it is in relation to a Babylonian deity. Now, does that mean that Mordechai is inherently not a Jewish name?
No, it's a Jewish name because it was accepted by the Jews and became a Jewish name. That's how names work generally.
Isn't if they're worshiping, if it's related to the worshiping of a deity, isn't
Right,
that
Mordechai? It's not Mordechai. It seems there's a lot of connection to Marduk, but it doesn't mean worshiper of Marduk necessarily.
okay? Like a disciple, like
Although, by the way, it could be that his name was Mordechai to the Persians because he worshipped Hashem. And maybe to the Persians, when you said to them, the King of Kings, the God that's above all the other gods, right? Maybe to them, they translated to them in their Persian minds as Marduk. Which is a mistake, of course, because Hashem is not Marduk. But maybe to them, when you have Mordechai, the Jews, who's the prophet of Hashem and the worshiper of Hashem, they called him the worshiper of Marduk, right? I'm just making this up on the spot based on what you said to me. It's a reasonable proposition, but I don't know the answer for sure. Hold on. I have a sneeze.
Bless you.
Oh no, I thought I muted it. Whoops. Woo. Oh my God.
Wait, what do the Arabs, Muslims call their God?
1 second.
I think they call them Allah, right?
Okay.
That was the prophet.
The Muslims call their prophet Muhammad, and they call their God Allah.
Oh, they do? Okay, so you're right.
Allah is Arabic for God.
But like that, like you're allowed to walk into. You're not allowed to walk into a church, but you're allowed to walk into a mosque Right. Because my dad said they worship the same God. So maybe it's the same thing with
Not
Mordecai.
because they worship the same God. It's not. That's not what it is. Because the Christians also worship the same God. The problem is that Christian churches often have a lot of idols in them.
Trinity.
They
Because
have
they
the
have the
Trinity,
doctrine of Trinity.
crosses, and statues of Mary, etc. But Muslim mosques have no images or statues at all because it's forbidden in their law, just as strictly, if not more, than in Judaism to have any images.
And I don't know
For
if this is
example,
true, but I heard-
we have
okay.
drawings of Moshe. We have drawings of Moshe. In Islam, it's forbidden to have even a drawing of Muhammad.
Right.
That's not even God. Not even God. Even Muhammad, you can't have a drawing. Okay.
Question: how do people today know what Moshe used to look like?
We don't know what it used to look like.
So how do we have drawings of Moshe?
Like any other ancient drawings, people use their imagination.
Oh, so it's not Moshe. It's just some random drawing that you call Moshe.
Okay. That's the same thing about any drawing from the ancient world. Nobody knows what anybody looked like back then. That's
Okay, so then maybe the Mark II people, whatever that guy's name is, maybe he was like the same Hashem but with different name.
Maybe that's what I said.
I know, so I agree with you.
Yeah, could be. I don't have a problem with that possibility.
By the way, my Rebbe one time said Zeus and all the Greek gods, they were what do you call it? They were malachim who were in charge of these different things, and then people made them into gods. They started worshiping them as gods.
Could be.
By the way, it says in the Talmud, I just found out, the Talmud Menachot 64b says that the full name of Mordechai was Mordechai Bilshan, Bilshan. So I don't know what that means. That's all it says, Mordechai Bilshan.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, we'll have to look it up. Okay, let's actually come back together.
Oh yeah.
We're all here, guys. Please make sure your videos are on so that we can continue. Okay, so we discussed one major misconception, right? The misconception that there are, because of all the arguments in Judaism, and so now all, amongst all the rabbis, etc., that shows that Judaism is not accurate. And I hope that I gave you very compelling evidence that that's actually not the case. Okay. So I want to switch to the other side of the coin. So two things that I wanted to do, right? Wanted to talk about misconceptions, try to get rid of as many as possible, and I will hopefully do that as we continue with the program. What I also want to do is I want to look at it from a positive perspective, meaning it's not enough. It's good, it's important, and it's necessary to get rid of misconceptions, but that's still not enough, because you don't want to just get rid of what people get wrong about Judaism. You also want to state strongly support for Judaism, right? How do we know that it's actually, true, right? Now, many people, they grow up with Judaism, so they accept it as something that they got from their parents, their homes, their rabbis, their friends, their communities, etc., etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, because all children accept whatever they learn from the people around them. But when you become an adult, that's no longer sufficient. It's not sufficient to believe simply because of the way you grew up, right? How can I possibly make such an argument? Because that's what we say to everybody else. Let's be consistent, right? Somebody grows up in the West Bank or Gaza Strip, Palestinian Muslim in one of these places, and their whole young life they're told the Jews are sons and daughters of pigs and monkeys, and you need to kill them, and if you die killing the Jews, you're going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins, which is of course pretty absurd, but that's what they learned from a young age. So we say
they never heard of that.
I'm sorry?
I said I asked my coworker about that, actually. He's Muslim, and he said he never heard of that.
He never heard of which part did he never hear of?
He said the 70 versions, he said, is the most crazy things he's ever heard in his life.
Is he a practicing Muslim, or is he ignorant Muslim?
He prays, he does all that stuff.
Okay. So what he just did to you is called lying.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think
Eliezer, I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like hearing, but it's the truth. Okay, and you can Google it and look it up for yourself and ask people. There is a Muslim law called taqiyya. Taqiyya in Muslim law means that it is a mitzvah by Muslims to lie to non-Muslims.
Oh, cool.
It is a mitzvah for them to lie to us so that they can get control and power and bring Allah into the world. Okay. That's why it is my humble opinion And you're welcome to disagree with me if you want to bring evidence against it, but I'm just going to be very straightforward. As my humble opinion, that if somebody calls themselves a religious Muslim, unless you have very good evidence, you don't believe anything they say. They're all lying at every moment whenever they speak to you because they're commanded to do so. They actually think it is a religious obligation to lie to us because we're heretics, right? We're whatever the word I forget the words that they use. And so when you have an entire group who their very belief structure is that it is a good, moral, and ethical thing to lie to people who are against you, then I'm going to assume that anyone who calls themselves religious Muslim, whenever he's speaking to me, is lying. That's my assumption. Unless I get very good evidence the other way around. Whereas in Judaism, right, we are forbidden to lie. Unless the only reason we're ever allowed to lie is to protect our lives. And even then, right, there's plenty of places, like for example, if the Nazis walk in to the room and they go right up to me and they say, "Are you a Jew?" I have to say, "Yes, I'm a Jew," even though they're going to kill me. I'm not allowed to hide the fact that I'm Jewish if they ask me directly.
That doesn't sound like a good idea. I mean, you're not preserving life if that's the case, in my opinion.
They're going to kill me anyway, but I'm dying for Hashem.
How do you know?
It's called, yeah, ask the 7 million Jews who died during the Holocaust whether they know or not.
Yeah, but still, it's
They
like.
killed every.
And also, some of them weren't Jews.
Oh, okay. So if they're not Jews, you can say it. If they're not a Jew, you can
No,
say
I'm
they're
saying
not a Jew.
I heard. I know I'm not. I don't know if I'm like allowed to say this, but I heard that in the Holocaust, like even if the mother wasn't Jewish, they still killed the person.
Okay, let me tell you a quick story, like 90 seconds, and then we'll continue with our topic. So somebody who I know, who's an old mentor of mine, who's involved in Jewish sport. You ever heard of Maccabiah games, like Jewish Olympics? I competed in the Maccabiah in 1997. So they have these worldwide Jewish Olympics. And he was speaking back in the 80s, like way long time ago, right? Before many of you were born, not most of you. Back in the 80s, he was speaking at a conference about Maccabiah. And what came up was the discussion about who is the Jew. And he said, look, according to Jewish law, you're only a Jew if either your mother is Jewish or you converted in an Orthodox conversion. Now, that doesn't mean that we, can't be friends. It doesn't mean we can't be close, right? But according to Jewish law, you're not Jewish. Right? That's the fact. So afterwards, an older
Rabbi,
gentleman.
I'm so sorry. Guys, whoever has their thing on, I can't find you. But whoever is on, could you mute yourself? Thank you.
So an older gentleman came up to my mentor and said, I want to thank you for enlightening me. And as he was speaking, he started to unbutton his shirt by the sleeve. And he's like, why are you thanking me? And he pulled back his sleeve and he showed a whole row of numbers. And he said, I just want to thank you for letting me know that while I was in Auschwitz, I wasn't really Jewish. Thank you for explaining that to me. Right? So you got to be really careful with that because it's true. But it's like one of those things, when somebody dies with us because they were Jewish, I don't know for a fact what happens to them, but I have a feeling that Hashem will take care of them, right? It's like, let's leave it like that.
Rabbi, where can I find that law?
They died for us.
Rabbi, where can I find that law that states that if somebody asks you and if you're Jewish, and you have to tell them the truth, otherwise, even if there's impending death?
If I remember correctly, it's in Maimonides, Mishnah Torah. I learned it many years ago, so I don't remember the exact dates, but if you'd like, I'll try to look it up during the week.
I appreciate it.
Not a problem. See, where would it be? Probably in the laws of Kiddush Hashem. I'll try to find it. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Back to our topic. So, that's where I was. So we demand of all the people in the world, we say, look, we're not going to blame you for what you were brainwashed as a child. But once you become an adult, you have to start thinking for yourself. And if you look around and you see that your society or your culture or your family, your people, whatever, are just doing things very wrong, then we expect, that's what we expect. We expect of people to to change and leave, grow out, get out of there. What are you doing, right? Whether it's people around different parts of the world, different cultures, different ideologies, whether within our own culture, within America, people on different political spectrums, every single person will say, you're a kid, I'm not going to blame you. But once you're an adult, if you stay in a system that is clearly wrong, then you're part of the wrong system, and you're just as responsible for the evils that are perpetrated by the system as anyone else, even if you're not active, because you didn't think for yourself and try to escape it. Right? So we as Jews certainly say that to everyone else, and everyone says that to everyone else. That's kind of like a universal thing. We say to everyone, if only you paid attention and thought and had an open mind, you would see the truth, which is that I'm right and you're wrong. And then you would agree and come to my side. Everyone says this, right? So it would be pretty hypocritical of us, right, to say everyone but us. Everyone else has to look with reason and intelligence at what they grew up with to see if it's true. But we don't, because we're Jews, and we don't have to actually think. We just have to accept what's true because that's what we learned since we're little children in our parents' home. Because, maybe other people's parents could be mistaken, but not Jewish parents. Maybe other people's teachers could be wrong, but not Jewish teachers. Maybe other people's philosophers and prophets could be wicked and evil, but not Jewish ones. No, never. Come on, guys. Really? Are we that arrogant? I mean, maybe we are, but certainly we shouldn't be. Any reasonable and rational person says, let me take a look at my belief system and ask, how did I come to believe these things? How do I know if they're true? If I have a problem with them, then what's really true? Okay. And so within Judaism, I believe that it is absolutely essential to not only get rid of misconceptions, but to also offer positive arguments for the truthfulness of Judaism. Okay? And I'm not, making this up, right? The rabbis have been doing this for thousands of years. Right? Many, many rabbis spent a lot of time, entire books written on bringing, sundry and various arguments. One of the most famous of which, if you guys ever heard of the Khazars, an entire kingdom. Actually, you guys should definitely know a little bit about the Khazars because they were in Gorskyville, right, in the Caucasus Mountains, right? You had an entire kingdom of people that all converted to Judaism around the year 600 to 700, I think, approximately. The whole kingdom converted to Judaism together, but they only lasted as a Jewish kingdom for about 100 to 200 years. I forget exactly how long, because eventually the Muslims conquered them and the kingdom was destroyed and the people were forcefully converted to Islam or murdered or exiled. But for a little while, there was a kingdom of Jews that were converts. So there was one of the great rabbis they were of Turkic origin. Yeah, that's right. That makes sense. Many Turkic tribes in that area of the world. So the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was a very, very famous rabbi. He wrote a lot of our songs that we sing on Shabbat and other places. But Yehuda Halevi wrote a book called Kuzari. And Kuzari is basically his, story of how the king of the Khazars came to believe that Judaism was true. And essentially the story is, the king had a dream that God spoke to him and said, I see your heart is pure, but your actions are not. So go and find out what to do. And he went, he asked the philosopher, he asked the Christian priest, he asked the Muslim imam, and finally he went and he asked the rabbi. And then the whole book is this rabbi, once the rabbi enters the story, most of the book is the rabbi showing to the king of the Khazars, number one, defending Judaism, and number two, bringing positive support for the truthfulness of it. And by the end of the book, he convinces the king converts and converts his whole people. Okay. So that's only one of the most famous ones, right? But the Rambam, Maimonides, many of the great rabbis of that period, not all of them were interested in doing it, right? But many of them did. The Talmud does it, right? As well, Rabbi Akiva, the stories of Rabbi Akiva and others, plenty of stories along these lines. So I'm not just inventing this idea. Okay. So I want to share with you today, in the next 20 minutes, one argument. One more thing I want to distinguish. You have to be careful distinguishing between belief in God and belief in Judaism, because although if you believe in Judaism, you must believe in God. You can't say that you follow Judaism and not believe in God. That's not Judaism, right? But the other way around, it could be. You could be someone who says I believe in God, but I don't believe in Judaism or organized religions in general, right? That's possible. You can logically say, it makes sense to me there's a creator, but I don't understand the truthfulness of the religion. Fine, it's very reasonable. I have a lot of respect for that, and you can work with that. You can go and think and argue and question further. So some of the arguments that I will bring are arguments for truthfulness of Judaism, in which case the truthfulness of God is built in, and some will be directly discussing truthfulness of existence of God, which will not necessarily prove Judaism, but it's okay. It's worthwhile to do both. So we'll start off with, I think, what might be one of the, how do I put this? This one is probably the least proof-like of all of the arguments. It's actually very much an intuition and emotional evidence. Okay, we're going to bring a lot of different kinds. There's different flavors. So this is not the only flavor of support that's brought, but it's really interesting arguments, and a lot of people have brought it over the centuries, and I think it's a lot of fun. Right? Is there any such thing? Question for you guys: is there any such thing as people? I don't mean maybe one person here and there who might be mentally, just different. Their brain is wired differently. We're talking about 99.99% of people, like almost everyone. Are there any people who believe, right, historically speaking, that there's no such thing as right or wrong behavior? There's no right and there's no wrong. There's no good and there's no bad. Are there any people in history that believe that way?
I think it's more likely that a person would say there are degrees of bad, but I don't know if they would say no bad or no good.
Yeah, that's fine. I think most people, there are some people who think very, very black and white. Something is either totally evil or totally good. But most people understand that that's not how life works. Life is complicated.
How about the generation of the flood? What do they believe? Were they just bored, but but they knew better?
Well, if you take a look at there are many discussions amongst the rabbis about what was the sin they even did, what were they trying to do. So there's different, there's no one clear answer. But one of my favorite answers is that the generation of the flood understood that what they were trying to do was create a distance from God in the life. Right? They said, okay, God exists, He's a creator, but we don't want to be involved in an intimate relationship with Him. He's creator. Let Him stay up in heaven and hang out and watch us from up in heaven, and let us do our thing and not bother us. And so the way that they did that is they created this tower. The tower represents, according to many rabbis, it's an interesting idea. The tower represents technology, right? Because the Torah itself said that they learned the new technology, how to make bricks. And with this new technology, they then right away built a tower. And so what is represented here is the idea that we can use technology to take care of ourselves. Many people think like this today, right? Science and technology will fix all the ills of society, right? Most of us recognize that although science and technology are super useful and they can help us to take care of many physical needs, science and technology do not take care of spiritual needs, right? We are not happier, generally speaking, or better fulfilled, or have better marriages, or raise better children, or have less anxiety, right, than the people who had less technology than us. And you could argue we have even more of the bad stuff in some cases. It's arguable. I've heard people argue both ways, but certainly we're not better off. In physical terms, of course, this is the wealthiest society that's ever existed in the face of the planet. We're better fed, better clothed, better housed, better protected from the elements and from violence than any human beings on the face of the planet that have ever lived in any place under any condition. It's astonishing how much better off we are physically speaking, but psychologically and spiritually speaking, not necessarily are we better off. But so that was, according to many rabbis, that was the belief system, the belief structure of those people, was that technology will take care of our needs, and we don't want to have God involved in our life anymore. Because like God flooded Noah and the world, we don't want to deal with that anymore. But any group of people has some. I'll tell you a crazy story. Okay, it's a story that I heard in yeshiva from a rabbi who was a Holocaust survivor. All right, listen to the story. He said that he was on, I don't remember where he was being sent to, one of the camps. He was on a train to one of the camps. And he jumped off the train. Somehow he was so skinny, he squeezed out of some window or something. He jumped off. Thank God he wasn't hurt. And he started running. Two Nazi soldiers jumped off the train to chase him. And he heard them coming. He ran for his life. And he wound up going to a farm. And there was a fence around the farm. And by the fence, there was a dog that was chained to the fence. Barking, dangerous dog. But, of course, he's got two Nazis chasing him. He takes the risk. Somehow he jumps over the fence and gets past the dog without getting injured. And he runs into a barn and he hides in the barn. And then he says, this is what happens after. He's looking out, of a hole in the wall of the wood of the barn. And he sees the two Nazi soldiers. They arrive to the farm. And he hears one of them say, I think the Jew ran into that barn. And the second Nazi said, yeah, but there's a dog in the way. We can't get past it. So the other Nazi said, so what's the problem? Just shoot the dog. And then the other Nazi said, shoot the dog? What'd the dog ever do to you? And then they turned around and they left. Okay? Think about that. Right? Here's two Nazis. They were on there hunting after a Jew to kill him. To kill a dog for no reason? God forbid. Right? Everyone has something. Everyone in the world, unless you're a sociopath, maybe, depending on what kind of sociopath you are. Right? But that's the minority of people. That's maybe 1 to 3% maximum, depending on how you count sociopath. Right? But almost every person understands that there's a right, there's a wrong. Now, what we can see is that many societies and people have argued about what that right and wrong is. But they all agree that some things are right and some things are wrong. Where did that idea come from? Where did the idea that some things are morally right, they're good, and some things are morally wrong, they're evil? Where did that concept come from? We don't see that in animals or plants. We don't look under the microscope and see that there are, some sort of objective morals that exist in the world. So the argument is that the only way it could be that all human beings believe in some sort of morality is because there is a God who created the universe with a system of morality. And we all feel that in our soul. In other words, it's the argument that we all have souls, ultimately. And if we have souls, then obviously there's a God. Now, if we don't have souls, if there is no God, if everything's just an accident, then there is no such thing as morality. There is no right and wrong, really. You might feel things, are right and wrong, but who cares what you feel? There's no such thing. One of the most famous atheists of the 20th century, Bertrand Russell, famously said that he found it hard to argue with the idea that the only thing wrong with terrible cruelty is that he didn't like it. But he couldn't argue with that idea, because if you're an atheist, right, then you're saying that philosophically there is no right and wrong. The problem with that is that almost nobody feels that way, right? Even atheists, right? Even atheists.
How about Sodom?
I'm sorry?
Sodom.
What about them?
They were very wicked. They had rules to their wickedness.
Exactly. That's the answer.
But
their morality was you don't take care of poor people, because once you start taking care of poor people, that destroys society. You have to let them take care of themselves. You may have heard people that talk about like that today in politics. This is called, in Judaism, this is called midot sodomit, the character trait of Sodom. is where we'd say, you take care of yourself, I'm not taking care of you. That is a terrible character trait. But that was their philosophy. They actually thought it was wicked to take care of poor people. I think one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century, that libertarian philosophers, her name is Ayn Rand. She said that one of the greatest evils is altruism. Altruism, where you take care of somebody else without expecting anything in return, and she called it a moral evil. Now, of course, in literally 5 seconds of discussing one of the most famous philosophers in the 20th century, I'm obviously oversimplifying. I've read her books, so I know a lot more than what I said in 2 seconds. But think about what that idea means, right? But she believes that that is right and that is wrong. We desperately disagree on what is right and wrong, but we completely agree that there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong, which means, think about this. If we as human beings, we desperately feel in our kishkas, right, that there's things that are right and there's things that are wrong, that means that we feel and we believe that there's a God. Because if there's no God, then our feeling is simply an illusion. It is completely misplaced. Very strange. How did evolution create this? Or whatever created this? It doesn't make any sense. Why would we have this deep, strong moral sense if there's really no such thing as morality? What's it based upon? There's no answer.
Rabbi, if there was no God, how would arguing? If there was no God, how would arguing that killing a man would be? How would someone argue that killing someone would be justifiable? I mean, that's also a hard argument to make.
What are you talking about? How many millions of fetuses were murdered by their fathers and mothers because they justified the killing of a human being? Abortion is one of the greatest mass murders in human history, and completely justified by people as being a moral good. It's easy.
Well,
the Nazis killed 7 million Jews and who knows, and several million other people, perfectly justified in killing human beings. So Stalin killed, according to estimates, anywhere from 20 to 60 million people in the Soviet Union over the time that Stalin was in charge. The numbers are mind-boggling. Mao in China, at least 100 million Chinese. The Cambodians killed 1 out of every 6 Cambodians. 1 out of 6 Cambodians was killed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the communist regime. It's not that hard to justify killing people, if that's where you want to go.
But I mean, is that just a justification? Is it just it's arbitrary? Is it
According
arbitrary?
to whom is it arbitrary? If there's no God, it's all arbitrary anyway.
I mean, to say the Hitler justified killing Jews by saying that we're inferior, and we're not.
And other things, and many other things. Actually, our being inferior was not his justification for killing us. Our being inferior was how he convinced the Germans to kill us. His justification for killing us, as he's been quoted as saying, is because we brought in this evil philosophy of monotheism and Judaism into the world, which he felt was a terrible evil, and he felt that we needed to return to our paganistic, morally relativistic, social Darwinistic roots. Mm-hmm. He had very strong beliefs on this, if you believe his writings and the people who quoted his speeches.
Rabbi, let me ask you another thing. In terms of, and this is, look, playing devil's advocate here, right? In terms of morality. Why?
Why are you playing devil's advocate?
No, in order to strengthen the faith, you have to attack the way you know it, right?
That's not devil's advocate.
Okay, so for lack of a better
devil's
way
advocate means I'm asking the question just because.
Okay, well, I'm asking the question with the intent to strengthen the faith.
Okay. That's God's advocate.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which reminds me why I took this philosophy class in college, and it was like completely like, I remember the professor would know who's atheist and who's not, and he would ask questions in accordance with their belief systems, kind of just to get at them. But anyway, my question is this: like, the argument is, without God, we would have no morality, right? No structure in terms of what is right and what is wrong.
And therefore, And therefore, Mark, let me give you the punchline. And
Okay.
since we all believe that there is actually something is right and wrong, that means we all actually do believe that there's a God. That's the first argument. Okay, now continue your question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like having a brain fart right now.
Happens to the best of us.
The thing is, because I know atheists come up with ways to justify morality without God. I mean, and I
Sure.
think one of the things that they say
None of them actually hold water though.
well, one of the things they say is that through evolution, you know, throughout time, people, it just gets into the bones, so to speak.
Then it's not morality. It's just evolved behavior.
But
Morality means something is actually right or wrong. That's what the word morality means by definition. If it's something that's just evolved behaviors over periods of time, that's not morality. That's evolved behavior.
so you're saying morality is not necessarily a physiological state. It's beyond that. It's
Of course.
I mean, it is a it's principle. It's a principle, right? But the thing is, the principle was evolved through trial and error, right? We
Nope.
do things and we feel things, no?
Nope. Because if it just evolved through trial and error, then it's not morality. It's evolved behavior.
But isn't morality evolved behavior then?
Nope.
So what is it?
Morality is a sense coming from your soul that there's something that's right and wrong.
Uh-huh. So that's the root of it, right? We're not, so an atheist would say morality, the root is not the soul, the root is the body or the
So they
mind.
want to use a word that cannot be removed from spirituality, the soul, and God, and they want to create a secular definition for it. But it's a losing proposition because that's what the word means.
So it's a sense of right and wrong that derives from the soul.
Now, it is true that that you witness how the people around you, what they believe is right and wrong from watching their behaviors. And those behaviors may have evolved over time. So the specific behaviors may or may not actually be moral, but everyone in the society thinks that they are because that's what they're used to.
I see.
I don't know why, but it reminds me, there was a rabbi in 1920s who was walking through Germany, and it's an interesting quote. And he saw this German walking with a little dog, and he had like a sweater on the dog because the dog, I don't know, put a sweater on the dog.
Right.
And the rabbi was quoted. He says, listen to this, it's like a crazy quote. He says, "A people who put clothing on their dogs will put humans into ovens."
Right. It's crazy.
I think what he meant, I don't know, because I didn't have a chance for anyone to did they ask him what he meant? I think what he meant is when putting clothing on a dog represents the fact that you're putting dogs in the same level. Humans wear clothes, right? Like in Torah, Adam and Eve wore clothes.
Right.
So when you put clothing on animals, you're saying that animals and humans are the same. That means there's no intrinsic spiritual superiority to humans.
But that's just like what you envision it as. If I just say I'm putting a dog on clothing on dog because I think it's adorable, I'm not saying it's thing. It's just what you interpret it as.
I hear. Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with you. I hear. I wouldn't have said that if I saw clothing on a dog. I don't know. He felt something in Germany, right? Because he wasn't wrong.
Yeah. I
don't we?
think, I
But
just want to say one thing. I think that just the meaningful takeaway for me, at least, in having the back and forth on morality, is that atheists believe that morality springs forth fundamentally from the body and the mind. And
No, that's not correct.
Is that-
Atheists believe there's no such thing as objective morality.
Okay.
There is no such thing as objective morality, as a standard of right and wrong that applies to all humans in all times and places.
So everybody's entitled to their own interpretation of what to do.
Whatever is right and wrong for your time, but that means it's not right or wrong, because if it's right, it's always right. If it's wrong, it's always wrong. If you go back to the 1950s, every single Jewish babushka would tell you abortion is murder. Fast forward to 2021, and the vast majority of Jewish babushkas in America would tell you abortion is perfectly fine. So who's right and who's wrong? Was abortion always fine, but the people who thought it was murder made a mistake? Or is it still murder and the people who think it's fine are making a mistake?
No, but that's not.
Someone's making a mistake. Tell me why.
That's a horrible example because even
tell me why.
If you're looking at it from a Jewish point of view, for example, like abortions in the Torah are written into something that's perfectly fine for within the first trimester.
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine within
Is
the
that what
first
the
trimester.
halacha says? 100%
Afterwards,
fine. No distinctions at all. No questions. Go ahead. Have a good time.
yeah,
That's
first
not
trimester,
true.
there's the distinction. After the third trimester, after the first trimester, it's if it puts the mom's life in danger, if we know something about the child, like things like that. That's already different.
Right, so now you're getting into details, right? You're right that there is a distinction between the first 40 days because the rabbis say that's when the soul
I
enters
know,
in.
right? I
Right?
studied this.
But okay, but all the rabbis will tell you straight up that you're not allowed to use abortion as a form of birth control.
It's not you're not allowed to, it's that you shouldn't.
I'm sorry, I don't distinguish between those two sentences.
No, it's not that you're not allowed to. There isn't an immediate penalty for if you do it. It's that you shouldn't do it.
Penalty by whom?
From God. It's not written anywhere. It's written by the rabbis. The rabbis determine.
The rabbis who taught me the subject didn't say it like this. It could be that I misunderstood or misheard, or they didn't get into that. If you have any sources that you can share with me that I could read on this topic, I would love to see it, because maybe I'm making a mistake there. I'd love to see it.
I'll have
But
them out.
I think we can all. So that's fine. So let's go after 40 days where we can agree on it. And if you have what to show me before 40 days, please. Like, I'm serious. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to put on a good face. Send me the sources. I'd love to see them.
Yeah.
But I have a question.
It's not a good example. Like, also not for nothing. Like, what's morally incorrect in one situation is not morally incorrect in another situation. Like,
of course, I'm not arguing that where mother's life is in danger.
I'm not talking about abortion anymore.
Okay.
I'm not talking about that anymore. Like, we moved on. Like, you're thinking.
But you can use the same thinking in all situations. For example, it's forbidden for me to shoot this guy in the head. But if he's coming to kill me and it's self-defense, now I can. Okay.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that. I'm not making a blanket statement of that sort. Of course, context matters.
So that's
But
all.
we would
That's
agree
all of
that
Judaism. Like,
we would agree that if it's not self-defense, what we call murder is always wrong. But if it's self-defense, it's not. If it's self-defense, it's not. Okay, so we're on the same page.
Right, but then it also comes but you're also like you're also like all of Judaism is context. Like the whole Gemara is context. Like that's all it is. Like,
of course, I always say the most important phrase I ever learned in yeshiva is "it depends," because everything depends on something. True. Okay, so what's the argument? We're on the same page.
We weren't a second ago, but I'm down to be on the same page now.
I don't see any argument.
Okay.
We were just right now. We've clarified exactly what it is, or I shouldn't say exactly because it's literally 2 seconds, but we've more clarified where we're holding.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying that it's contextless, of course. Okay. Any last questions for the evening?
Question. Like, they said with the Holocaust, they said that the baby, if one baby's crying, and it's gonna alert for the room.
Yeah, that's wow. Yeah. So, right, what does Jewish law say? Generally speaking, there's an idea there's something in Judaism called rodef. Rodef is when somebody is acting in a way that's going to kill someone else, you're permitted to, if there's nothing you can do to stop them except for killing them, then not only permitted, but in many circumstances, it's a mitzvah to kill the attacker. Now, that's when someone is chasing with a knife or gun to kill someone. What you're bringing up is a case where the rabbis, basically what they did is they said, does this apply to the principle of rodef? There's a baby crying, Jews are hiding in a basement and there's Nazis walking over, and all of a sudden one of the babies starts to cry, right? And and they have no way to make it quiet, so they have to cover its mouth with a pillow. And even though that might kill the baby, but that baby's crying is actually putting everyone in danger. So the rabbis, what I read is they would argue that that's not murder, right? It's not called unjustifiable.
Yeah, but that thing doesn't have a brain to decide whether I'm crying, or whatever. He doesn't understand anything. So you're basically killing off something that doesn't understand anything yet.
Yeah.
Before it has a chance to even.
If a 4-year-old, fine. If a 4-year-old runs at you with a gun, a 4-year-old's running at you with a gun. He thinks it's a toy, and he's literally about to pull the trigger and shoot you. And there's nothing you can do to stop him except shooting him first. It's a stupid example, but just to illustrate it, right? There's nothing you can do. You can't knock it out of his hand. You can't whatever. There's literally the only thing you can do to stop him is to shoot him first. So of course you're allowed to. You have to protect your land.
You're allowed to, but should you?
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question.
Because I
don't
know
have-
a lot of
I-
things the
I
Torah
hear-
allows you to do.
I hear the question,
But
and it's a
the question
distinction
is-
that we brought. It's a distinction that was brought earlier about the before 40 days of abortion, where there's a distinction between being permitted, being forbidden, and being something that is.
Also, with abortion, the baby, you're stopping the baby's chance. If let's say the person did make a mistake and have a baby and they don't want the baby, they're taking the baby's chance that they made a mistake and now they're punishing the baby. He might not be so conscious or whatever. I don't know the
Listen,
exact.
if the mother's life is in danger, there's no question.
Okay, obviously, if he's not endangering the mother's life and the mother's like just confused about her life,
So then there's a big discussion there, right? There are some rabbis that hold that a mother's psychological well-being is not sufficient to kill the fetus after 40 days, for sure. Before 40 days, it's much more lenient.
But when does the soul come in? 40 days in?
I'm sorry?
When does the soul come in? Because
40. According to the Talmud, it's on the 40th day the soul enters into the body.
and it's just
I think the issue also is that a lot of times people, if someone is not interested in having that child, they'll just go, oh, I have issues. I'm mentally unstable right now. I'm not gonna have.
Then the rabbis discuss it.
Right.
For sure.
That's not right.
There are discussions. Some rabbis would say that's not sufficient, and some rabbis would say that is.
Every action has a reaction,
course.
and sometimes you gotta own up to your actions. And if you got pregnant, you either give it up for adoption. There are plenty of people that are looking for babies to adopt, or you have a child. That's it.
I hear, but there are some rabbis who say that if a woman's mental health is at risk, then you don't say that. You say to preserve her mental health, then you would abort a fetus even after 40 days. There are rabbis who say that. Yeah, of course you have to have. Yeah.
That's murder, though.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, but
You're
it's
killing the
Okay.
soul.
Guys,
But
I
what
didn't want to
happens to
take
the
this.
soul? Is he gonna go to?
Guys, this is not a class on abortion. We require a whole hour to discuss it. I'm just telling you that those opinions exist. You want to know what they are? We can have a class on them. I'll bring out my notes from when I learned this stuff a couple years ago, right? And maybe we can get some more research, and we'll be able to get into it and give it the clarity and attention it deserves.
Thanks. Let's do that.
Okay,
I
ladies and
agree.
gentlemen.
I'm sorry,
I'm gonna-
Rabbi G.
I'm gonna-
One last thing.
I need to
thing.
run. I'm so sorry. I have to run. I have another meeting I need to go to. If you have
Okay.
any questions that you want to get answered that I didn't have a chance, just send me a message.